for all the organisations that he's supported and influenced.
When Prince Edward stepped into the shadows of royal affairs, few expected him to become a pivotal player in the monarchy's most turbulent chapter. But behind those measured silences was a man watching and waiting, and now his quiet loyalty has roared into action, challenging Camilla's grip and signalling a seismic shift. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For decades, Prince Edward remained the monarchy's most understated figure, content to walk behind the headlines, avoid scandal, and maintain a quiet dedication to service. While others battled for position and influence, he carved out a space of dignity and neutrality, never once appearing hungry for power. But beneath that calm exterior was a royal who had been quietly taking note of every fracture, every whispered betrayal, and every overreach within the palace corridors. And when Camilla began her campaign for a new royal honour, an unprecedented designation designed to permanently secure her stature, Edward found himself dragged out of the background and into the storm. This wasn't just about a ceremonial title. Camilla's proposed honour would elevate her above all consorts in modern royal history, redefining her legacy and entrenching her authority within the hierarchy. It was, in every sense, a coronation by stealth. The proposal, discreetly floated within the Royal Honours Committee, required the consensus of key senior royals. One name in particular mattered more than most: Prince Edward. As the Duke of Edinburgh and the patron of countless royal institutions, his endorsement would signal unity. Without it, the proposal would stall, maybe even collapse. What followed stunned the palace. Edward refused, not with fanfare or anger, but with precision and finality. He vetoed the honour in private consultation, invoking not only constitutional caution but a moral stance that shocked even his closest aides. The Queen Consort's supporters were blindsided. Charles, though technically removed from the process, was left to deal with the aftershocks, and Camilla, who had already begun positioning herself for the grand unveiling, was reportedly livid. Yet the most disturbing part for her wasn't the rejection itself. It was the growing realization that Edward's move had been calculated, deliberate, and possibly premeditated for months. Whispers soon emerged that Edward had long viewed Camilla's rise with unease. He had watched her consolidating power, reshaping royal traditions, and sidelining anyone who posed a threat to her vision. To many, his veto was a sudden shock. But to those who had been paying attention, it was the first visible crack in an unspoken resistance. Edward had waited in silence, but now, his loyalty had chosen a side, and that choice would change everything. But while Edward's denial stunned the inner circle, it was who he supported instead that turned whispers into war cries within the palace walls. In a world of royal calculations, every alliance comes with risk. So why would the ever-cautious Prince Edward throw his full weight behind Catherine, the woman whose presence once unsettled the firm? Because behind her gentle gaze lies a force even Camilla underestimated. From the outside, Prince Edward's decision appeared perplexing. Known for his restraint, his loyalty to the institution, and his deep avoidance of internal drama, he had long been a royal who neither opposed nor endorsed, who preferred duty over disruption. But his sudden and unapologetic support of Catherine wasn't just a personal gesture, it was a royal declaration. To back Catherine was to resist Camilla, and Edward had never made such a move before. Those who had dismissed him as neutral had clearly misjudged. For years, he had quietly observed Catherine weather the quiet humiliations, the subtle exclusions, the emotional toll of a palace that never fully embraced her strength. And when the moment came to choose, Edward chose her. Catherine, with her carefully measured words and faultless composure, had endured more than the public knew. While tabloids praised her grace, inside the palace, she had faced cold shoulders, backroom whispers, and constant attempts to diminish her growing influence. But she never cracked. Not once. And it was this quiet resilience, this refusal to play into palace politics, that earned Edward's private admiration. Away from the public eye, the two had shared off-the-record conversations, often brief, often coded, but always meaningful. They both understood what it meant to stand in the shadows of louder voices and how silence could sometimes speak louder than a crown. As public favour tilted further in Catherine's direction, staffers began to notice something curious. The palace aides closest to Edward started echoing subtle support for the Duchess. Events once attended separately were now shared. Invitations were extended with Catherine in mind. Within royal charities and institutions, her name began to rise, backed not by PR teams, but by Edward's quiet approval. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy, but in the language of the royals, it was undeniable. Edward had shifted the weight of tradition and favour toward the woman Camilla had hoped to eclipse. And then there was William, the one man whose position was most affected by Edward's allegiance. Behind closed doors, sources say he was torn. Grateful, of course, that someone in the family had stepped up to defend Catherine's dignity, but also cautious. Because with every endorsement came a new threat. Catherine was no longer just the beloved future queen consort, she was becoming a counterforce to Camilla. And William knew better than anyone that this shift would not go unanswered. Still, Edward did not flinch. He understood the gravity of his gesture. It wasn't merely familial, it was institutional. In backing Catherine, he was signalling the future he wanted, for the monarchy. One led not by entitlement or reinvention, but by resilience, sincerity, and service. The kind Catherine had given for years without asking for recognition. And for the first time, it seemed someone in power was finally seeing her for what she truly was. Not a wife, not a duchess, but a leader. As Edward quietly pushed Catherine forward, Camilla was already mobilizing to protect her legacy and what she saw as her rightful crown. It wasn't enough to be queen consort. Camilla wanted more, a new title, etched in history, untouchable by scandal. And behind closed doors, she launched a campaign more aggressive than anyone expected, including Charles himself. From the moment she stepped into the role beside the king, Camilla knew she was never going to be remembered the way she wanted unless she rewrote the narrative herself. The title of queen consort, though grand in public perception, still carried the weight of compromise. It was tethered to controversy, forged in decades of whisper campaigns and societal division. Camilla wanted something beyond survival. She wanted reverence, and to achieve that, she pursued a new legacy. A lifetime honor that would formally enshrine her as the royal matriarch, a title that had never existed, yet would forever distinguish her from the rest, one that would outlive her, redefining her presence within the institution not as an accessory, but as a foundation. Her plan was meticulous. She began meeting privately with senior courtiers, those who had served multiple monarchs and knew the machinery of royal protocol like the back of their hands. She framed her proposal not as a demand, but as a natural evolution, one that would stabilize the monarchy in uncertain times. A ceremonial designation, she argued, that would unify the public and preserve continuity. But it wasn't unity she was chasing, it was dominance, and the courtiers knew it. Some nodded in agreement, others hesitated. But Camilla didn't stop there. Strategic leaks began surfacing in sympathetic tabloids, dropping hints that her new honor was already in motion. Words like unprecedented, historic, and inevitable floated across headlines. Public relations surrogates quietly echoed support on morning shows. Behind the palace walls, Charles was reportedly caught off guard. He had approved many of Camilla's prior moves, some reluctantly, but this was different. This had implications. This meant overshadowing not just tradition, but those who still viewed her as an outsider. Yet she pressed him with increasing urgency, subtly implying that public loyalty to her reign required a tangible stamp of permanence. The pressure mounted. Camilla was everywhere, attending more engagements, holding more private meetings, inserting herself into charities traditionally reserved for monarchs and heirs. She was laying claim to the crown in spirit, not just title. And though many in the palace complied, there were rumblings. Some feared she was pushing too far, too fast. Others, more loyal to the old order, whispered that the monarchy wasn't hers to redefine. Among them was Edward. He watched, with that same quiet intensity that had always defined him. Unlike the others, he didn't object out loud. He observed, measured, waited. It was Edward who realized that Camilla wasn't just chasing a ceremonial gesture, she was attempting to eclipse everything and everyone who stood in her path. The honor wasn't about public service, it was about rewriting hierarchy. And as the whispers grew louder, Edward stepped forward, not with protest, but with opposition, not with spectacle, but with finality. In a world where few dared to stop Camilla, Edward did. But Camilla's ambition wasn't just about a title, it was about eliminating opposition, and at the top of that list was the woman now under Edward's wing. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Camilla's strategy against Catherine wasn't about confrontation, it was about corrosion, isolation, whispers, erasure. But in the palace halls, silence often screams the loudest. It began subtly. A missed invitation here, a quiet reshuffling of seating charts there. Events that once featured Catherine as a central figure suddenly went on without her. Her name vanished from briefings. Her team stopped receiving updates. Official explanations were vague, scheduling conflicts, clerical errors, miscommunications. But those who watched closely understood it was no coincidence. This was deliberate. Catherine was being edged out not with scandal, but with shadows. A soft, relentless exclusion that grew louder with every omission. And behind it all was a hand too precise to be accidental. Camilla's. She didn't need confrontation when manipulation would suffice. Her power didn't shout, it whispered behind closed doors, and moved pieces no one else even saw. Soon after, the press began to circle like vultures sensing weakness. Leaked stories painted a strange picture. Rumors of Catherine's declining health, of emotional strain, of her growing distance from senior royals. Headlines questioned her visibility, her state of mind, her marriage. Some accused her of withdrawing. Others speculated she had been frozen out. The palace made no effort to deny it. On the contrary, it appeared as though the silence was being used as confirmation. And while the public speculated, within palace walls, the message was clear. Catherine was no longer at the center of power. Even palace staff, those who had worked closely with her, began to notice the change. Her posture remained upright, her smile intact, but something had shifted. She moved with a quiet hesitance, often retreating behind protocol instead of leading with warmth. Her presence, once radiant and reassuring, felt restrained, tense, like someone walking a tightrope in a storm. And yet, she never complained. She never pushed back. She never leaked a single story in her defense. That was her strength, and it was also her danger. Camilla knew that a woman who suffers in silence cannot be provoked, only dismantled slowly. But what Camilla didn't account for was Edward. He saw everything, not through briefings or whispers, but through instinct. The same instinct that had told him to trust Catherine when others doubted her. He recognized the signs: strategic marginalization, emotional pressure, institutional gaslighting. He had seen similar tactics used before, and now it was unfolding against the very woman he had chosen to support. And as the psychological war escalated, so did Edward's quiet fury. He didn't explode. He didn't speak publicly, but within his circle, he began to raise alarms. He began to demand answers. And most importantly, he began to prepare a message that would make it impossible for Camilla to keep playing in the dark. But just as Camilla thought she had cornered her rival, a message from Edward shattered the palace's fragile peace. In a rare face-to-face meeting, the tension between Camilla and Edward reached a boiling point. What began as diplomacy ended in a clash that would echo across royal history because Edward didn't just say no, he exposed everything. The confrontation took place in the heart of the palace, behind a door that had remained closed to scandal for years. But on that day, civility gave way to a reckoning. Camilla, certain that Edward's denial could still be reversed, approached the meeting with a mix of arrogance and calculation. She expected hesitation. Instead, she was met with steel. Edward didn't stall. He didn't entertain flattery. He looked her in the eye and refused to support her proposal again, this time with no room left for compromise. But it wasn't just a rejection. It was an unmasking. With quiet precision, he laid bare what everyone had tiptoed around. Camilla wasn't building legacy, she was tearing at the fabric of unity for personal ascendancy, and he was done watching in silence. Camilla, stunned by the force of his pushback, dropped the facade of diplomacy. Her voice, though composed, carried venom. "You're siding with a commoner over your queen," she hissed, weaponizing the title she had fought so hard to possess. But Edward didn't flinch. His answer came sharp, deliberate, and final. "I'm siding with the crown's future," he said, each word cutting deeper than the last. That single line silenced the room and shattered any illusion that this was just another internal disagreement. This was war within the Windsor ranks. What followed was chaos, but not the kind that spills into headlines. It was the kind that seeps quietly into every corridor, every whispered conversation, every cautious glance between senior aides. The palace was stunned. Courtiers who had spent years bending to Camilla's growing influence now found themselves exposed. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of history, and yet no one knew which side would win. Behind the scenes, Charles was thrust into an impossible position. On one hand, the woman he had stood by for decades. On the other, his brother, a royal who had never asked for attention, now commanding it with undeniable moral force. Charles didn't speak publicly, but his silence was damning. Meetings were postponed, statements delayed. The palace, so often a masterclass in controlled messaging, suddenly felt rudderless, and all because Edward had dared to say what no one else would. That loyalty to an individual could not come at the expense of the institution. That some ambitions, no matter how regal they appear, are too corrosive to crown. The balance of power had shifted, but no one knew yet how far the cracks would spread. As news of the denial leaked, it wasn't just Camilla who panicked. It was every royal faction that had quietly benefited from her reign. The royal family thrives on unity, or at least the illusion of it. But in the wake of Edward's rebellion, lines were drawn, alliances whispered, and old loyalties tested, and no one knew who would be next to fall. Within hours of Edward's defiant stand, the palace began to fracture quietly, yet unmistakably. It wasn't loud. There were no public statements, no official condemnations. But behind the velvet curtains of tradition, tension pulsed like electricity. The House of Windsor, once so adept at keeping its disputes sealed in silence, now found itself gripped by a slow, simmering panic. Some tried to hold the center, others chose sides, and a few, sensing the tides shifting, simply watched and waited. At the heart of that stillness was Princess Anne, unyielding, unreadable. She neither praised Edward nor defended Camilla, but those who knew her best understood her silence wasn't neutrality, it was calculation. She was watching, and that alone terrified the courtiers. Charles's inner circle began to splinter. Senior advisors scrambled to walk a line that no longer existed, trying to preserve Camilla's dignity while averting a full-blown PR catastrophe. Some urged the king to reaffirm his support for his wife. Others quietly suggested stepping back before Camilla's shadow swallowed the entire monarchy. The king hesitated. His silence wasn't strategic, it was conflicted. The woman he had loved for decades was under siege, but so too was the institution he had sworn to preserve. His indecision left a vacuum, and power, in any palace, abhors a vacuum. William, ever the careful heir, knew he couldn't remain silent forever. Behind closed doors, he began a series of quiet meetings with Edward, brief, off-calendar, heavily guarded. What they discussed, no one could confirm. But insiders noted the tension on William's face after each encounter. Was he aligning with his uncle? Or was he pleading for restraint? Whatever the answer, one truth was clear. The future king was being forced to navigate a battlefield, not of his making. Then, in a move no one predicted, Meghan and Harry re-entered the storm. After months of silence, a single post appeared across their channels, a cryptic quote about truth standing when titles fall. It never mentioned names, it didn't need to. The message was clear. They were backing integrity and, by extension, Catherine. That single post ignited a wildfire online, with commentators, journalists and royal watchers reading between every line. The Sussexes had joined the fight, and though they remained far from the palace gates, their voice carried globally. Meanwhile, leaks began to trickle from inside anonymous accounts of years of tension between Camilla and the younger royals. Stories of vetoed appearances, blocked honours, whispered insults behind closed doors. The press pounced. The public listened. But instead of outrage toward the firm, something remarkable happened. A surge of support erupted for Catherine. Online forums, newspaper columns, and public surveys all echoed the same sentiment. The people were tired of palace games. They saw Catherine not as a player, but as a survivor, and in her stillness, they saw strength. But amidst the chaos, Catherine did the unthinkable, not a statement, not a protest, but a bold gesture no one saw coming. She didn't need a title to show her worth. Catherine stepped into the spotlight, not with words, but with a move that stunned the press, swayed the public, and signaled the dawn of a new kind of royal leadership. While the palace was still reeling from Edward's defiance and Camilla's unraveling grip, Catherine made no declarations, issued no denials, and sought no revenge. Instead, she appeared at a long-scheduled charity gala with a presence that rewrote the narrative without speaking a single word. Dressed in elegance, she wore the very symbol of unspoken royal power, Princess Diana's iconic tiara. It wasn't just an accessory, it was a message, a silent, piercing reminder of grace, resilience, and legacy. The symbolism was immediate. Headlines erupted within hours. Social media exploded. It wasn't a rebellion, it was a reclamation, and everyone knew it. The event itself was already expected to be high profile, but Catherine's speech took it beyond headlines and into history. With measured poise, she spoke not of titles or traditions, but of truth, service, and the importance of integrity over entitlement. It was subtle, but the implication was thunderous. In less than 7 minutes, she dismantled the palace's months-long campaign to sideline her, not through accusations, but through presence. There was no need to name Camilla. The contrast had already been drawn by public memory, by symbolism, and by the sheer emotional weight of what Catherine represented. She didn't ask for the crown, but in that moment, the crowd and the world saw it already resting above her. The media did what it does best, magnified the moment. Across front pages and primetime coverage, one narrative cut through the chaos. Catherine was not just surviving the storm. She was mastering it. Words like modern monarch, true royal, and the queen the people want dominated the coverage. Analysts dissected her speech, commentators praised her restraint, and even those once skeptical of her staying power now began to acknowledge that she had emerged as the most composed and compelling figure in the royal family. Meanwhile, Camilla's absence from multiple recent engagements became harder to explain. At first, it was dismissed as scheduling conflict, then as minor health concerns. But the pattern was undeniable. She was disappearing from public view, and the speculation around her spiraled. Some said she was retreating to regroup. Others believed she was being quietly advised to step back. Whatever the truth, one fact remained. Her grip on the monarchy was slipping, and no one seemed eager to tighten it for her. Perhaps the most powerful image wasn't even of Catherine alone, but of Edward, standing silently at her side during the same public event. No statements, no performance, just presence. The message was clear. Catherine was not fighting this alone. She had allies, and not just any allies, those with the bloodline and credibility to shift the monarchy's future. Together, they represented a version of the royal family rooted not in manipulation, but in principle. But even as the tide turned in her favour, Catherine knew the palace had not yet settled, and her next move would define her legacy. The monarchy didn't collapse, but it did recalibrate. Camilla's dreams were curbed, Catherine's influence soared, and Prince Edward emerged as the unlikeliest kingmaker in the firm's modern history. There was no grand announcement, no formal denial. Camilla's proposed elevation simply disappeared, swept aside with quiet efficiency, never to be spoken of again. It wasn't a victory Catherine asked for, nor one Edward paraded. But the message was unmistakable. The monarchy had chosen survival over self-indulgence. The royal matriarch honor was buried before it could be born, and in its absence, a new kind of power began to take root. One rooted in restraint, dignity, and timing. And at the center of this silent revolution stood Edward, the man who had always kept his distance from the spotlight, now credited with preserving the very institution he had spent his life protecting from within. In a rare moment of unity, Charles stepped forward not to defend Camilla, but to publicly commend his brother. With carefully measured words, he praised Edward for upholding the stability and heritage of the crown. It was not just a gesture of gratitude, it was a declaration of direction. The firm was signaling a return to balance, a shift away from individual ambitions and toward collective restoration. Behind the scenes, subtle reforms were already underway. The honors system, once manipulated through quiet lobbying and favoritism, was being reassessed. Protocols were being rewritten, advisory, councils restructured. The crown was, at last, learning from its missteps. Catherine, still without any new title or formal recognition, began stepping into roles of deeper consequence. She was granted direct oversight of key royal charities initiatives long kept under senior royal control. Her influence grew not through force, but through presence. With every new engagement, her image evolved not as a consort in waiting, but as a leader already commanding. The public embraced her ascent with rare unanimity. For the first time in a generation, the monarchy's narrative aligned with the people's will. And it was Catherine, not Camilla, who became the face of that fragile harmony. As for Edward, he did what he always had. He stepped back into the shadows. But this time, the world saw him differently. Dubbed by insiders and the media alike as the Protector Prince, his name became synonymous with quiet strength. He had intervened not for glory, but for principle, and in doing so, he had rewritten the rules of royal influence. While others grasped for titles, Edward defined legacy by what he refused to let happen. That kind of power doesn't need applause, it endures in the space it protects. Gradually, the monarchy's image began to repair. Scandals faded into whispers. Public skepticism softened into cautious optimism. The firm, once bracing for collapse, found itself on steadier ground. But its foundation, though mended, was not immune to future tremors. Yet, beneath the royal smiles and carefully posed portraits, one truth remains. The war for the crown may be paused, but it is far from over. Weeks after the dust had settled, a letter surfaced unsigned, carefully worded, and delivered to a senior royal advisor. Its contents? A veiled threat, a reminder that some alliances still lurk in the shadows. And a chilling question. Was Camilla truly done? The message arrived in a plain envelope, devoid of insignia, typed in neutral language but unmistakably laced with implication. There was no direct accusation, no overt warning, but every line carried a subtle menace, carefully chosen phrases that referenced internal matters only a select few would understand. Loyalty must remain absolute. Mistakes have been made before in choosing sides. And then, the most cryptic passage of all. Legacy finds its way back, even when blocked. The letter was quietly flagged, handed up the chain, and archived under lock and key. But by then, the whispers had already begun. Camilla may have vanished from view, but her influence had not. Reports soon emerged that certain Commonwealth representatives figures with long-standing ties to Camilla's personal charities and causes had been quietly questioning the firm's recent decisions. Not in public, not yet, but in diplomatic circles, where language is a weapon and timing everything, the signals were clear. There were still those who believed Camilla had been wronged, still those who saw Edward's intervention not as noble, but as political sabotage, still those willing to restore her influence, if not in London, then beyond it. The monarchy's crisis wasn't as resolved as it appeared. It had merely shifted shape. Then came the leak. A voice note muffled, distorted, but unmistakably real. It featured a senior aide to a former royal confidant, speaking in hushed tones about a second campaign. One that had been prepared in case the honours proposal failed. One that involved sympathetic journalists, supportive dignitaries, and a slow, deliberate push to reframe Camilla not as a failed contender, but as a silenced reformer. The voice didn't say when or how, only that the plan hadn't been abandoned. It had been postponed. Inside Catherine's camp, urgency returned. Her team, once optimistic after the recent wave of public support, now found themselves reinforcing the walls. Media protocols were tightened, staff movements were tracked more closely, digital security overhauled. It wasn't panic, but it was preparation. Catherine, though still composed in public, understood better than anyone that the crown she never asked for came with shadows she could not ignore. And then Edward spoke again only once. At a formal banquet for a diplomatic delegation, he raised a glass and offered a toast that sounded, to most, like standard ceremony. But to those paying attention, it carried an edge. Some honours come at too high a cost. It was brief, intentional, and it landed exactly where it was meant to. His presence, his vigilance, had not waned, and neither had the stakes. The monarchy, once again, found itself standing at a precipice. The storm had passed, but the clouds had not cleared. In every photo op, every public smile, a question lingered behind the eyes of the royal family. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.